Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining the Democratic Women's Caucus for today's event. We are so happy that you all joined us. We have all of the chairs and co-chairs of the Women's Caucus, along with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, our guest speaker, Stacey Abrams, Kristen Clarke, and Maria Teresa Kumar. Thank you all so much for joining us. I will now pass it to Chair Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence to begin our program.
Healthy, and I'm so grateful that women are coming together to talk about this important issue, the power of the women's right to vote, history and our future. So today we're going to reflect on some of the historic events and processes that gave us, that's a very troubling thing for me to say, gave us the right to vote, but also what are we doing with that vote? I am so happy to have this group of panelists with me. I'm also very excited about, one second, I'm muted. Hello, everyone. How are you? I'm so glad that you all are here. I want to say, first of all, I hope everyone is safe and healthy. And I am excited to talk about our theme, the power of the women's right to vote, our history and our future. We in this country we have quite a history and a relationship with our power to vote as women. And so we're going to talk about our path to where we are now. And we have an amazing set of panelists and my co-chairs who are going to talk about our current state and our future. I want you to know that being here today is about our right, one of the most powerful powers of being an American. Susan B. Anthony said something I thought was really good. We ask for justice as women, we ask for equality, and we ask that all civic and political rights that belong to the citizens of the United States of America to be guaranteed to us, women, and our children, our daughters forever. Susan B. Anthony said that. And as we talk about women's rights and voting rights, in 1920, women finally won the right to vote, and we commemorate that this August 26, 2020, as our suffrage centennial. But as we know, while the right to vote was won on that date, the fight was not over. We know that the history of our country shows that Black women did not get the right to vote, and Native American nor Hispanic women. In much of the country, hurdles like poll tax, literacy tests kept Black voters disenfranchised until the passage of 1965. These women made a change. They had the power to change things and demanded that the power of their vote spoke for them and for their families. Today, we all have that power. We have the power to vote and to keep fighting. We're in the middle of two public health crises, COVID-19, and I'm calling systemic racism as also a public health crisis. Our voting rights continue to be attacked, and it's critical that we use our platform as women in our history and the women that shoulders we stand on to continue this fight. I'm excited today to have with us to speak to us an amazing woman who all the things that we fight for in this country when it comes to rights for women. And if I could give you a statistic while I'm introducing this amazing woman, women vote in higher numbers than men and have done so since every election since 1964. In 2016, 9.9 million more women voted than men. Women have voted at higher rates than men since 1980. In 2016, 63% of eligible female voters went to the poll compared to 59% of the men. And I'm saying that while I have a woman who has made history, and I'm so proud to be able to share this time of her life and my life, and we coincide, and I get to witness her brilliance. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. She is a woman who has led with no apology, not without asking permission, but demonstrating to generations of women what it means to have a seat of power and what you can do with it. I am so happy to introduce to many and to just reacquaint others with the amazing Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very generous introduction. I am happiest in the Congress when I'm with my women colleagues, because I take such joy in the leadership that you all bring and the difference that you all make. I'm happy to be with you today. When I came on to the calling us a call, I was hearing Maria Teresa talk about the voting registration that is being done in Texas. That was music to our ears. That's really a source of great joy. Thank you, Maria Teresa, and Voto Latino for what you are doing. And you called me as I was coming by with a book that I was reading called Stacey Abrams, Our Time Is Now. The Madam Chair was talking about the times that we are in. Congratulations on this and all that you do to make sure we remove obstacles of participation. I know both of you will be joined later by Kristin Clark, and we, of course, are all very aware of the very important work that the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law does. So this is all about the vote, women in the vote, removing obstacles to participation in the vote, and the rest. So I'm very happy to join my distinguished colleagues, the chairs of the are we calling it the task force? The Democratic Women's Caucus. That's different manifestations. Of course, Brenda Lawrence, our distinguished chair, thank you for your great leadership, relentless, persistent, dissatisfied on behalf of women across our country. Lois Frankel, she's the person who gets things done. When it comes to, if you want to get it done, she's operational. Thank you, Lois, and your work with Women Lead as well as with the caucus. And Jackie Speier, well, what can I say? Jackie and everything that she does, whether it's the security of our country, the economy of our country, the rights of women, protecting women in the military, the list goes on and on, but magnifying the role of women in all of that and protecting women as well. All of it so central to what we do. Veronica Escobar and Deb Haaland, the vice chairs of the Democratic Women's Caucus. It's an honor to be with all of you. As you see with this presentation today, the beautiful diversity of our caucus. So I feel very honored to be the Speaker of the House in the Congress that is going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women having the right to vote. Imagine what it took. As you were started to say earlier, when we were given, the headline said, women given the right to vote. Given? No. Yes. Fought for, marched, starved, were starved, thrown out of the house, you name it. But they had a goal, and they got the job done. And now we have to exercise that right to vote and make all the difference in the world. And to be serving at the time, each of us who are serving here, at the time when it's a 100-year anniversary and over 100 women in the House of Representatives. That's really remarkable. 90 of them Democrats of the 105, 90 of them. Just thought I would mention that. So next month when we celebrate, observe the ratification of the 19th Amendment, we're not only honoring the achievements of the past, but understanding the shoulders that we all stand on and what our responsibility is to the future. And that future is better the more women who vote, the more people who vote, actually. Tomorrow, Tomorrow is I don't know what you want to call it, horrible day. 7 years ago, when Shelby versus Holder decision was handed down by the court and unleashed a vast, relentless partisan campaign against a voter suppression. That's really what it was about. And then at the same time, hostile foreign powers weighing in, then the coronavirus being an obstacle to full participation because of proximity and the rest. So the challenge to the vote is from a sickness standpoint, from a hostile standpoint, and from a judicial standpoint, from the court. So I thank you for bringing folks together to talk about how important this is. Again, when we first came into power this time, the first bill we passed, HR 1, one of the first bills we passed was of the For the People Act was HR 1 to fight voter suppression, the John Lewis piece of it that takes out the voter suppression, fighting attacks on our election, and it also included what we also have as HR 1 and HR 4, the Voting Rights Act. You think that would have been an easy thing for Republicans to vote for. Oh, did that sound partisan? Oh, I was just talking civics. So what we want is we want money. We want money so that we can honor the right to vote for all Americans. $3.6 billion. We got $400 million in the CARES Act. In the HEROES Act, we have 3.6. It's going to be a fight because they know that the only way they win is when fewer people vote, or when the vote is further suppressed by geography, by schedule, and by the coronavirus. So I thank you for what you are doing here today. I look forward to hearing the panel. But it's always important when women come together because we know our power and we know what needs to be done, and we're multitaskers and we want to get the job done. Operational, as I said, of Lois Frankel. But now, when Martin Luther King said, fierce urgency of now, think of how not only urgency, but the opportunity of now. And we're just not walking away from it. Whether the coronavirus has sharpened our intensity, whether George Floyd's murder, assassination before our very eyes, sharpened our determination. But one thing's for sure, it made the public awareness of what is at stake so much greater, therefore heightening our responsibility. 133 days, well, I think it's 132 now. I'm not sure what time we crossed to 132 days until the election. No wasted time, no underutilized resources, and no regrets the day after the election. For everything that we care about, as personal as a woman's right to choose, as broad as the security of our nation, the security of our planet that Kathy Castor is working so hard to protect, everything is at stake. And the answer to it all is a four-letter word. It's four-letter in Spanish and four-letter in English. Voto vote. So thank you for what you are doing. Thank you again, Madam Chair, for your extraordinary leadership, your kind introduction, and the invitation to spend some time with the girlfriends. That's what I love to do. I had 5 older brothers, so I love my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Isn't it appropriate as we celebrate 100 years, we have a woman leader for us as Nancy Pelosi. At this time, I would like to bring forth one of the co-chairs of the Democratic Women's Caucus, and that is Ms. Lois Frankel, Congresswoman from Florida. She has been a mentor of mine. We shared the title of mayor together, and now we share the title of being members of Congress, and we are the co-chairs of the Women's Caucus. Ms. Frankel, it's your turn to speak. Thank you. Unmute yourself. Okay, we hear you.
You would think I would learn that by now. It's hard to believe. Okay. So first, of course, thank you to our Madam Speaker, and thank you to Co-Chair Brenda Lawrence. Thank you so much for your leadership today, and a shout out to my colleagues who are on with us, and hello to everyone who's with us today. I am so excited to hear from this dynamic panel of amazing women as we mark the centennial year of the 19th Amendment, when some women gained the right to vote. And it was with this right and through record engagement and activism that the women of this country helped deliver our Democratic majority and the most diverse Congress in history. Women, we've been at the forefront of the fight for affordable health care, including reproductive health care, equal pay, freedom from violence and discrimination. But we cannot stop until every American has an equal opportunity to succeed. And in many ways, in so many important ways, that starts with equal access to the ballot box and removing the obstacles our citizens face in exercising their right to vote. And if I may just quote a very cherished colleague of ours, John Lewis, who has said, "Voting is the most powerful nonviolent tool or instrument in a nonviolent society. We must protect it and we must use it." And I am looking forward to the discussion and hearing from this very esteemed panelists. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much. And now I have the pleasure of introducing the other co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, just an amazing voice. She has tenure in the Congress, but most of all, she has a track record of standing up and taking the tough fights when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to producing legislation and awareness of issues when it comes to women. Congresswoman Spears is from the great state of California, and it's my honor to introduce you, Ms. Jackie Spears. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for bringing us together to talk about this historic issue. To our Madam Speaker, it's always thrilling for us to hear you and to watch you in action as the first and only woman to serve as Speaker of the House, not just once, but twice, I might add. And to our distinguished panel, I am so looking forward to hearing from Stacey Abrams and Teresa Kumar and eventually Kristin Clark. Let me just say that we still have so much work to do. My colleague Lois Frankel mentioned our great leader, John Lewis. So his other quote was, "You got to make good trouble." And I hope that we will continue to make good trouble. I have in my office 2 framed documents from the archives. One is an 1871 letter from Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and others imploring Congress to give women the right to vote. That was 1871. It took 49 years for us to get that right to vote. Most of those leaders were gone by the time we got that vote. On November 4th, 1917, the suffragists were peppered with rotten eggs, beaten. A couple of them were raped, and they were met by prison guards who choked and kicked them, and one was even stabbed between the eyes. Those are our suffragists who came before us. The other document I have on my office wall is from the National Association Opposed to Women's Suffrage, which was a group of women who in 1917 were saying that women shouldn't get the right to vote. If women got the right to vote, it would make pestering a national pastime. God forbid that we should pester. Let me just say that I think the coronavirus has underscored once again why we have so much to fight. The essential workers in this country are women. The need for childcare is absolutely critical. And as we watch the primary presidential race, new studies have come out to show that the women candidates running for president, more than the men by a long shot, ones they were viciously attacked on social media. So we have a lot of work to do. but most of all, we have the intention to make sure that we're going to get in trouble. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much. As we continue, we are so excited to have a freshman who has stepped up to the point of leadership, Veronica Escobar, who also adds so much value with her rich commitment to service. And also, she brings a diverse voice to us as women as we lead in Congress. Ms. Escobar, please, it's your turn to have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Lawrence. I want to first and foremost thank you for hosting this very important dialogue. And I want to thank everyone who is participating and watching online to discuss this critically important topic about voting rights. I want to also thank our heroine, Speaker Pelosi. I have told her before that these very, very dark times have been so challenging for all of us. But in this moment of darkness, she has risen up to be the hero that our country so badly needed. And so, Speaker Pelosi, thank you for being our hero, our heroine, our fearless leader, the champion that inspires all of us. I'm so grateful for your leadership. I also want to thank and express my gratitude for the rock star panel, Chairman Lawrence, that you brought together. What a great opportunity for everyone to listen to true champions of justice and equality and the right to vote. I want to just piggyback off of something that my colleague, Congresswoman Speier, mentioned about this election that's coming up. We know more than anyone, we as women know more than anyone how critical this upcoming election is. You know, we say it, it feels like we say it every election that this is, you know, this upcoming election is an important one, but literally this upcoming election is the most important of our generation and probably of our lifetime. We have so much on the ballot. Forget the names, it's our values on the ballot. Up and down the ticket, we have our democracy on the ballot. We have the right to our bodies and our future on the ballot. We have healthcare on the ballot. We have decency and the humanity that our country needs to reconnect with on the ballot. And I believe, I truly believe that it is going to be women who save this country. And as I started in my comments, our heroine, Speaker Pelosi, who's been leading the way, to the great colleagues that I have the incredible privilege of serving with in the Congress, to everyone in this country that is working hard for our democracy and for what's right. Thank you for what you do. I know our women will save this country. Thank you, Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to get rolling with this amazing panel that we had. And we are the run of show is that each of our panel will speak and the time left will be used for Q&A. I am so excited to introduce Ms. Abrams, the founder and chair of Fair Fight Action, an organization dedicated to advancing voting rights and electoral reform. First African-American in history nominated by a major party as its nominee for governor. Prior to running for governor, she served in the Georgia General Assembly and serves as the House Minority Leader. Ms. Abrams, you are truly a rock star, and I just want to say to you, please give us a few remarks so that we can benefit from your experience and your passion. Ms. Abrams.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Lawrence. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, Congresswomen Speier, Frankel, and Escobar for having me here today. I'm always in the right place if I'm on a panel with Teresa Kumar and Kristin Clark. It is my honor to be here. I have spent the last 2 years focused on a single mission. And that is that in lieu of becoming the first Black woman to be a governor in the history of the United States, my mission was to make certain that the vote and the voices of Georgians and Americans can be heard. I've been involved in the conversation of voting rights since I was young. My parents used to take us with them to go and vote. There's 6 of us, and as I describe in our book, we looked like make way for ducklings as we trailed out of the voting booth. But what my parents wanted us to understand was that it wasn't enough to want things to change. You had to be a part of that change. And they learned that early. My parents were civil rights activists as teenagers. My father was arrested at the age of 14, registering Black people to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We like to tease them that my mom was doing the same work. She was just smart enough not to get caught. But they wanted us to understand, and they instilled in us this belief that the right to vote is sacred. It is how we put our faith in democracy and how we pledge our trust and our faith and our fealty to one another. Because when we come together and vote, we elect those who represent our values, as Congresswoman Escobar so eloquently put it. But we also know that there have been those throughout our history who have not seen women as human. If you were Black, you were invisible. Black, you weren't human at the inception of this country. If you were Native American, you were invisible. And if you were a woman, you were to be silent. And it has taken this country more than 100 years to come to terms with what happened in 1920, that giving women the right to vote wasn't enough. It's 150 years since we gained the right to vote for African American men. And it's been since 1965 that most women have been able to enjoy the right to vote, but that right to vote remains imperiled by people who do not believe that we belong here. And that's fundamentally what we are fighting for in this election. We are fighting to make certain and to remind us and to renew ourselves in the notion that we are American because we are here, because we believe, because we're willing to work and fight and defend and protect this country each in our way. Whether you serve in our armed forces, or you're one of the women who's an essential home care worker who is taking her life into her hands every time she takes care of another person's family. Essential workers on the front line across this country have met COVID-19 by defending the notion that we are all in this together. And we deserve to have a country led by people who believe we're in this together. And so I've spent the last 2 years fighting 2 fights. One is to make certain that voter suppression is called out and acknowledged as real. As the speaker talked about, as Congresswoman Lawrence mentioned, we know that voter suppression is real, and for women, it is deadly, because we are the most likely to see our rights reduced if we do not address voter suppression. Voter suppression is simple. It's if you interfere with the right of an American to cast their ballot if they are eligible. And for women in particular, the vestiges of voter suppression that continue to seep into our nation are dangerous. Can we register and stay on the rolls? Can we cast a ballot, and does our ballot get counted? For women in particular, suppressive voter ID laws are deeply problematic because 90% of women change their last name. That means almost 34% of women are likely to be captured by voter ID laws that make it difficult to prove who we are. But we also have to remember that in addition to voter suppression at the ballot box, we face the suppression of an undercount in the 2020 census. This census is going to set the tone not just for the next decade, but for the next generation. We know that the 2020 census has already been rigged and unfortunately undermined by the Trump administration. Their attempts to scare people out of participation, to underfund it, and to put hacks in place to underestimate and to undermine the census. But we know that the census tells a story of America, especially the women who take care of families and communities. And so I'm here to urge women not only to cast their ballots, but to cast their census and make certain they get counted, that they count the young children in their families who need to be included so they can grow up in a healthy environment. To take care of those men around them who forget to get it done, we've got to remind them. And to make certain, particularly for communities of color, that we are counted so that we don't get counted out. Because everyone on this call understands the votes that we cast are not simply going to be votes to redo the 2016 election and get it right this time completely, but it's also about making sure that we have state legislatures who draw fair maps in 2021 that protect us at the school board level, the city council level, county commission level, the state legislative level, and yes, at the congressional level. But we need this work to happen, and we need you to get it done. And so I'm excited to be here to have these conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Your passion always just absorbs and pulls me in. Thank you so much. You give me hope. At this time, I want to recognize Ms. Maria Teresa Kumar, who is the president and CEO of Voto Latino. She is currently the president and CEO of, I think I'm saying it right, Voto Latino, a grassroots political organization focused on educating and empowering a new generation of Latino voters. She is a social entrepreneur and an Emmy-nominated MSNBC contributor. So it was with honor, I give the floor to you, Ms. Kumar.
Thank you so much. This is such an honor. Speaker Pelosi, I was just recalling that it's almost 15 years to the date when we first had a conversation about Voto Latino. So thank you so much for your early on support. Thank you for being the warrior that we need. Thank you for the members of Congress and for Representative Lawrence and Escobar, Speier, and Frankel to provide a space to speak clearly and honestly of what lies before us, but also the opportunity. I am always in great company with Stacey Abrams and Kristin Clarke. I am such an admirer of anything you do. Either women call me and absolutely it's a yes, and then I get into trouble. So thank you so much for having this conversation today. Voto Latino, as I mentioned, we are 15 years young. We started in 2004, but it was because we were reading into the tea leaves of the future. I grew up under Pete Wilson's America in California, where he decided that he was going to create the most outlandish show me your paper laws that scared the Latino community and immigrant community in California. He expected us to hide, but instead we had conversations with our family members. Young Latinos organized with their family members, talked to them about the importance of becoming citizens. I had the conversation coming from college saying, I'm angry, upset, and concerned. And I convinced my grandmother, my aunts, and my uncle all to become naturalized citizens. That holiday, millions of my peers were having that exact same conversation. And what we saw, that a state that was solidly a swing state became permanently blue because Latinos and immigrant communities organized, mobilized, voted, and now speak to our values. And so in 2004, we saw that there was going to be a rising Latino participation in the next 10 years. We did not expect us to be so quickly with a Donald Trump, but he was always in our rearview mirror. And so Voto Latino, we saw when we started 30,000 young Latinos turning 18 every single month. Right now, starting in 2016, a tsunami of 1 million young Latino voters turning 18 every single year and won't cascade for a decade. We are targeting a young group of people because we know that 60% of Latinos are under the age of 33, and all our work is centered disproportionately on young Latinas because we recognize that young women are the force in their households. They're navigating America with their information. They're translating either at the doctor's office, but we want them to translate at the voting booth. We also recognize that young Latinas outperform when it comes to participation. They are high networked and they provide information, but more importantly, they provide influence. So at Voto Latino to date, we have registered over 710,000 individuals. 79% of the people we registered go out and vote. But just in this last month of June, we have eclipsed all our records in voter participation. Just this last month, we have registered over 207,000 individuals, and we are well on our way to registering at the 500,000 and mobilizing 1.5 million in the election. And in the states that count, 71% of the people that we register are women, and 80% of the people that we register are under the age of 33. So when folks tell me that young people aren't paying attention, you just haven't been clever enough to go and talk to them because they are passionate about their world. They are passionate about climate. They're passionate about social justice, but they oftentimes don't have the avenues of entry. And Voto Latino provides that. Not only do we register folks, but we also provide people with the information that they need. We reach roughly about 8.5 million people a week. And I share all this information because oftentimes in this moment that we're living in, it's easy for us to say that the job is hard, that there are barriers and obstacles, but we have a community of young people who are willing to get engaged. They are the ones that helped for the very first time usher in the most diverse Congress in 2018. For the very, very first time in 2018, Generation X, Y, and Z, and I can include myself in that finally, outperformed at the polls than any other generation. For the first time, we're going to have 12 million more young people eligible to vote than we did, and they are going to eclipse the baby boomer generation. 2/3 of those young people are young people of color. And so when we talk about what the opportunity is we need investments in the hardest to reach corners of our electoral base and to grow it because they are yearning for participation. But when we look at what is happening right now, COVID split open the 50 years of Martin Luther King and the civil rights unrest, what he was trying to talk about when it talked about social injustice and institutional racism. COVID split it open in 50 days where we recognize where the racial disparities truly lie and how we need to level up. And it has been women who have been leading the charge more recently in making sure that we are talking to our essential workers, that making sure that they are the most vulnerable, sadly, when it comes to our healthcare, when it comes to our teachers. How do we make sure that we're preparing for the future? Very rarely do we have a generation where we are able to make a massive reset and realign our priorities. And I deeply believe that as hard as COVID is, in particular hitting communities of color, in particular hitting young Latinas, we have an opportunity to actually speak to those values with the leadership that we have right now in Congress. Our hope at Voto Latino is that the job is not done. We will show up and make sure that we are changing Georgia, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, Florida. We want to make sure that we also deliver not just the Senate, but also a new White House, because this task is great. But we have an American public who is willing to listen and who recognizes that we need a massive reset. So thank you for this timely conversation. More importantly, thank you for the work that each of you do, because it's going to take all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'm just so excited to have these amazing women here with me today. Kristin Clark is one of those women that I have called upon to educate me, to keep us informed. She is the president and executive director of the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, one of the country's most important national civil rights organization in the pursuit of equal justice for all. Throughout her career, she's focused on work that seeks to strengthen our democracy by combating discrimination faced by African American and other marginalized communities. With that, I am so honored and excited to turn the floor over to Ms. Kristin Clarke.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lawrence, for your leadership and always creating a space for us to be reminded about the central role that women have always played in our nation's suffrage movement. So grateful for you, and thank you to Congresswoman Frankel and Speier, and to Speaker Pelosi for your leadership and for just being that moral compass that we so direly need in our country right now. And always great to stand on the front lines with Maria Teresa and with Stacey. I'm grateful for all of the work that you do to fight to ensure that everyone has voice in our democracy. It's an honor to work alongside the both of you. Violence waged on peaceful protesters. Black people shot and killed without basis. White supremacists wreaking havoc and causing racial divide. Racially motivated tactics aimed at silencing Black voters. Federal courts that increasingly do not reflect the diversity of our country. These are statements that don't describe, that describe the 1960s, but also describe exactly where we find ourselves in the country right now in 2020. While we've made progress, the progress is fragile, as we have seen in 2020. I want to talk a little bit about what we saw in the context of our work just yesterday in Kentucky and in New York and other parts of the country that were engaged in voting yesterday. We saw the number of polling sites reduced across the state of Kentucky from the thousands to just a few hundred. One site serving people in the Lexington area, one site serving people in the Louisville area. We saw long lines that stretched for about 2 hours in Lexington. We saw a relatively smooth day that ended in sheer disaster in Louisville when voters accessing that single polling site in Jefferson County that were trapped in long lines trying to get into a parking lot and trying to race to that front door. We saw people disproportionately Black banging on the Expo Center windows trying to get to vote. And fortunately, through the issuance of an emergency injunction, the doors were opened and those people got to vote. But I'm thinking today about one woman in particular who went to vote with her 18-year-old daughter, a young woman who was voting for the very first time. And she literally broke down in tears when she entered that expo center and talked about the trauma that her daughter had been going through, trapped at home, not in school, not able to go to a prom, but losing the opportunity to vote for the first time yesterday meant everything to this woman. And she was grateful to be pulled from the brink of disenfranchisement and grateful that she and her daughter were able to exercise voice in our democracy. We have a lot of work to do to get this right. Stacey does such a great job lifting up the ugly, bitter reality of voter suppression that we face in every part of our country right now. And the picture is grim. Tomorrow marks the anniversary of the Shelby County versus Holder decision. And at every turn, we see officials in every corner of this country exploiting that ruling to the detriment of Black, brown, and low-income people. This ruling is a grave threat to democracy. It's opened up the floodgates to voter suppression. And at this moment, here's what we're up against. We have hostile officials in places like Texas and Tennessee that are literally using the pandemic as a pretext to deny people access to the ballot. We have well-funded nefarious groups like True the Vote that are working to purge the voter registration rolls. We have a US Justice Department that hasn't brought a single case to enforce the Voting Rights Act on behalf of African Americans, Latinos, and people of color. This has made our work all the more difficult in this era. What do we need to do now? We've got to fight. We need Congress to restore the Voting Rights Act. And I want to thank members of the House for the important work that you did at the end of 2019 to build up a record, making clear that we need the full protections of the Voting Rights Act in place. We need the Senate to do its job and move that bill. It is critical to the fate of democracy. We need to provide funding so that states can ensure that voters have access in the wake of the pandemic. Everything that we've seen this primary season makes clear that states have a lot of work to do to get it right. To get right providing absentee ballots, to get right providing access during early voting, and to get right in-person voting on election day. We've got to stop allowing officials to use the pandemic as a pretext to deny access, and we've got to support the work of groups that are on the ground doing this important work. At the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law, we lead a program called Election Protection. It is nonpartisan. It is a 19-year long program that works to ensure that people have access. And we are hearing from voters by the tens of thousands who are reporting complaints and barriers that they face with respect to accessing registration and accessing the ballot box on election day. I am hopeful that these kinds of conversations spark the reform and the hard work necessary to ensure that every American has voice in our democracy in 2020. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We are now going to open it up for questions. I know the speaker is still on. If she wants to ask a question, please do. Speaker Pelosi, do you have a question?
I was muted. You like that?
No.
My comment is how impressive this panel has been, really, in every way. Stacey, Mary Teresa, and to Kristen, really, you just put it out there very clearly what the challenge is, what the opportunity is. But you also use your word, Kristen, a spark. You light a spark. As you were speaking, I was thinking, the change is just banging down the doors. History is in a hurry. It's going to happen. I was thinking of the book that I read in The Plane Coming, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo's book about just people just none of us almost realize how susceptible we are to change. We think we're there, but we're not all there to our capacity. So I thank you for giving us hope, because you have the values that our Madam Chair said, the values, you have a plan. You have a plan to get from here to there. You have a connection to the public on all of this. And Maria Teresa, when you were talking about Pete Wilson, oh my goodness, what was he thinking with his proposition? It was like, are you kidding? And he found out.
But he awakened us. He awakened us, so it was good.
Well, you know, that you never know when opportunity presents itself. And now we have to consider everything an opportunity.
That's right.
And this is an opportunity to use this to just not even pivot. It's bigger than that. It's like a precipice. We just have to get ourselves past a reckoning. Everybody uses that word, but it's very appropriate. So thank you for just being who you are and giving us so much hope. It was lovely to hear you. Now I'm going to go up to the Rules Committee because we're going to put forth a bill that is a piece of the HEROES Act. There's a piece of it that we took out because people are going to be evicted from their homes. You know, the 3 months of being up of moratoria and all the rest of that. And so Maxine Waters in the HEROES Act, well, we had it in the CARES Act, but the Republicans rejected it. We put it in the HEROES Act. It's a big sum of money that deals with renters, with mortgage forbearance and homelessness, everything to do with housing so that people are not on the street. And it's going to be we're going to put it on it's coming out of Rules Network publicly now, and then we'll bring it to the floor on Monday. And again, it's part of the HEROES Act, so it's of itself essential. People are being evicted now, much less at the end of the month. And it is a signal to them that we're taking it a piece at a time. If you don't want to take it all together, we're going to take it a piece at a time. We're going to help our heroes, state and local government. We're going to open our economy by testing. We're going to put money in people's pockets with unemployment insurance and direct payments. We're going to have our money for voting, our $3.6 billion for voting. We're going to support the Postal Service. We're going to feed the American people. They resist SNAP and WIC and that. And we're going to have OSHA have a strong rule that people have to follow. They want immunity. They want protection. Just do the right thing. Protect the workers, protect yourselves. So in any event, I'm going to excuse myself in that regard, but I
Thank you,
wanted to
Madam
hear what you all
Speaker.
had to say. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaker.
I have a question. I was really moved by Mrs. Kumar's comments and by Stacey Abrams about the generational impact of women have on voting. You talked about how the little duckling stream, and you talked about Maria, the younger generation coming forward. So I would like to ask the question, can you just kind of, when you're speaking to women and about our role in voting and how we protect the legacy and how, you know, I can't not walk away from the power that women now have at the polls. We are 63% of us are voting. So I would like some more comments and telling our caucus how we can tap into that generational impact of voting for women.
So on one of the things that Voto Latino found is there's 3 ways that we could make connections. One was a program that we ran with Emily's List, specifically in Nevada, and they were trying to connect to young Latinas. And in the survey and research, we encouraged them to talk specifically about healthcare, because our assumption was that a 23-year-old young Latina, because they're probably in the workforce, but their parents are doing backbreaking labor, they deeply cared about healthcare, because if something happened to them, they became, they had to make a life decision. Do I continue going to school? Do I take on another job to take care of my parents? Sure enough, that was one of the first things that we learned, was that the sandwich generation of of a white 54-year-old woman was having the same caution, it was having the same concerns as a 23-year-old Latina. So we were able to do messaging that connected these two intergenerational pieces through the lens of access to healthcare for everyone. And it proved, and it was funny because it was all anecdotal, but then we actually had the research to prove that our theory was true. The other one is that the majority of Latina women are roughly 27 years old. So when you start speaking about taking away their reproductive health care and the reproductive health, access to reproductive health, that is one of the biggest motivators that in the district, in this where red states where Mitt Romney looked like he was about to win, it was young Latinas that came out and voted their values all around reproductive choice because they are in the middle of their careers. They want to make sure that they're controlling their own body. And so that is another issue. And last but not least, and this is outside of immigration, but last but not least, we also know that environmental issues are really something that they care about because sadly, environment and climate is the same fault lines as societal injustices and inequities. So that is an issue. And oftentimes we will talk to it through the lens of not just environmental, but also through the lens of health, such as diabetes and so on and so forth, because they live in food deserts. Those are the three pieces that we know in the through row. Putting immigration aside is something that really connects with the community, with this particular audience.
The only thing I would add, I think it's the macro of one, making sure we understand that when men don't vote or don't register, it's typically because they feel ignorance makes them look less masculine.
That's right.
Women don't vote or don't register because they're afraid of making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the solution is ensuring that women feel armed with information. So this kind of outreach works, but particularly the more localized that outreach is, the more likely they are to participate. Because if they don't know something, they'll skip it, which is why we have this amazing turnout at the top of the ticket. By the time you get to the bottom, 4 people are voting. So it's making sure that they know what's happening, they know what they're voting for. The corollary to that, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that we use, to your point, Stacey, we use Ballot Ready. So it allows people to basically pull through everything. And they basically take that crib sheet into the voting booths. So absolutely.
The corollary to that is, I'm sorry.
Go ahead and say.
The corollary to that is that they need to connect. We have to connect the dots. As Maria Teresa was pointing out, we need them to understand that if you want reproductive choice, it's not just about Congress, it's who are your state legislators. They make the decision about whether or not you control your body. If you're upset about the fact that your child's school is underfunded and that you live in a community where the school is decrepit, but down the street they go to school in a cathedral, that's your school board. And so we assume that there's a direct connection, but we have to do a better job of curing for the lack of civic education that so many voters have, especially women voters. And so making sure they know who's in charge of what they're upset about. And then the third is making sure that we have those conversations with the people who are the least likely to vote. The tendency is to tell the people who already know something, tell them more. But those who are enlisted, those who didn't vote in the last election, those whose names have fallen off because they're inactive, and Kristen can tell you about how dangerous the inactive list are in our states. When they get moved to the inactive list, in particular, their names come off of all the mail you send out. They don't get any of the phone calls. Therefore, they don't get any of the information. And because they don't vote, they so they don't get information, so they don't vote. And because they don't vote, they don't get information. And that, in fact, that not only impacts them, but it infects their entire circle, because these are the women that convince others to go and vote. And so we have to make certain that we are not just sending out information and proselytizing to those we know will vote. We've got to go to those who are on the inactive list. Mm-hmm. Research shows that their profile is almost identical to whether they're voting or non-voting. If the unlisted had voted at the same rates as their peers, we would have won every election since 1996.
Wow.
Stacey, as to the inactive list, how do people even know they're on the inactive list?
They don't. And that's one of the challenges. So when I talk about voter suppression, it's can you register and stay on the rolls? And included in that is being moved off of the active list to the inactive list as the precondition to taking you off the rolls altogether. There are 9 states that have use it or lose it laws on their books, but there are 44 states that utilize that practice. And, the lawyers committee can tell you all about it and can give you the list, and I'm happy to share that as well. But that's one of the things candidates have to be really intentional about, is looking not only at the active list, but asking for the inactive list, because voters don't know about it until they're pushed off the rolls. But politicians can find out and can demand that their consultants not only give you modeling based on the mail that you go to your active list, you need to get the mail and information for those who are on the inactive list, who share the profiles of likely voters.
I want to jump in here. We have Lois Frankel who has a question. I want to make sure if Jackie Spears have one. When the two of them ask their questions, we'll open it up for you all to respond. And then unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. So Lois Frankel.
Okay. First of all, again, thank you. It's you're three fabulous people, just incredible. So I'm from Florida, and my constituent happens to be Donald Trump. He voted by absentee. So, but this is very interesting. In Florida, where we have very, very close elections, for years, the Republicans dominated the vote by mail process. You don't need an excuse in Florida. It's vote by mail. But let me tell you what happened. It's what happened in 2016. We've been working on it. In 2016, Democrats finally had an $8,800 person margin in vote by mail. This year, this is a drum roll, we have over a 300,000 person advantage. And my question to you, our party seems to think it's because the president is discouraging Republicans people from voting by mail. I just would like to get your comment on that, and ask you whether you see that phenomena around the country.
And now, Ms. Spears, if you ask your question, and then our panel will be able to answer both.
Thank you, Brenda. I would like to hear from our panelists, and you've been fabulous. Thank you so very much. I could listen to you all afternoon. Where should we be putting our focus for those that feel disenfranchised, whether they're, as Stacey mentioned, the inactivists? What is the universe of people that we should be targeting that would be ripe for voting opportunities?
I'll jump in and maybe take your question, Congresswoman Speier. One, I am fascinated, I think we all are, by this moment that we're in. The protests, I think, are part of our new normal and are largely being led and driven by young people. I think that the challenge for us and the opportunity is to figure out how we ensure that every single one of them channels that angst and that appropriate anger that they feel to the ballot box. And it kind of connects with the point that Stacey was making about ensuring that people understand the power of their vote. If you're someone who cares about criminal justice reform, then do you appreciate and understand the power of your elected sheriff who runs the jails in your community, who sets policies on things like solitary confinement? If you are somebody who cares about criminal justice reform, do you think about your elected district attorney who can literally make the call on whether or not to prosecute that cop who used violence without basis? Do you understand and appreciate the power of your mayor, who in many instances may get to select or fire the police chief? So I think the opportunity for us right now is making sure that people understand that voting is one of the most important and powerful forms of protest. That as you march in the streets on election day, you got to channel that angst right to the ballot box. That to me is kind of the unique, exciting opportunity that we're presented with in 2020.
And I would underscore that we need all of you to humble brag more of your accomplishments of 2018, because for the very first time, young people outvoted their other generations, but they have not seen the complete action of the incredible legislation that you have created. And I'm speaking of not just the modernization of HR1 of our election systems, but also the fact that you passed background checks for the first time in 25 years, that you passed DACA, that you passed women's health, reproductive health, going down that list. The community does not know. The American public does not know. And if we are able to show the 400 beautiful pieces of a blueprint of what we see in America, and contrast it to the Republicans that are basically letting these pieces of legislation rot at their feet, that is what they need to know. They need to recognize that their vote actually did something, that the people that they brought into office have been working. Because right now, if you ask them, the majority of young people, they showed up and they're not quite sure what happened. And so I would encourage you really to do that. And then the other thing is that the biggest opportunity of growing the electoral base right now is between young people, 12 million more young people than baby boomers, and you have 15 million unregistered Latinos. But we know that when a Latino is registered, 79% of them participate. The challenge, though, is to reimagine how you do outreach, because oftentimes we recognize resources are limited, but oftentimes members and the party only contact high frequency voters. And as a result, in the last two elections, 49% of registered Latinos never received a contact. But when you know that 1 out of 10 individuals going to the voting booth this election are either going to be young voters or they're going to be naturalized citizens, by that measure, they just don't have a voting history and we're missing it.
And the way I would tie all that together is one, so I'm going to humble brag for a moment. In our election in 2018, we tripled Latino turnout, tripled Pacific Islander turnout, increased youth participation by 139%, and we increased Black participation by 40%. But to put that in context, 1.1 million Democrats voted in 2014 for Jason Carter, Jimmy Carter's grandson. And that's 1.1 million Democrats total. In my election, 1.2 million Black people voted for me. So the increases are absolutely there, but what we did different, and this goes to your question, both of your questions. One was that we did not use high frequency voters. We went to anyone whose profile looked like they may share our values, including people who scored basically essentially like Republicans, but not because they were Republicans, but because they don't have a vote history. We turned out more voters than anyone in the history of Georgia for Democrats because we went to all of them. And the utility of having a presidential election in these states is that those campaigns, coupled with their Senate campaigns and their federal campaigns, as well as local and state campaigns, can push those voters to turn out. It only takes 1 or 2 contacts. They're so hungry for information, they will show up if anyone shows interest.
That's right.
Second part is that we also have to recognize that for the increases that we're seeing on our side, it is driven by enthusiasm and fear. And so to Representative Frankel, yes, we have an outsized amount of participation, but we are then going to face an outsized amount of intimidation. The Republicans have committed to roughly $60 million worth of voter intimidation, including 50,000 poll watchers, something they haven't been able to do since 1981 because of how egregious their behavior was. They intend to scare our voters out of line, which is why vote by mail is so essential. They intend to terrify our voters who are using vote by mail by saying that they're going to go to jail if they make a mistake. That's why the HEROES Act is so important, but it's also why, to everyone's point, hearing your voices, telling people, vote, we've got you, we're protecting you. For the first time in modern democratic history, we are working together. Groups from all across the country through Fair Fight, Fair Count, through the work that Kristen does, the work that Mayor Teresa does, across the spectrum, we are sharing information to protect the vote. And I can't leave this conversation without saying we cannot forget that the census is an act of voting. If we do not participate in the census, we are going to get 2010 all over again. And no matter how wonderful 2020 turns out to be on the electoral side, if we do not win the census and win down ballot, we are going to have a redo of 2008 and 2010, but all in the same moment. And I just don't have the stomach for it. So.
I just want to thank everyone. This is a conversation we need to have more sessions on. The amazing panelists, my co-chairs, we want to thank you so much for being here. I just want to close with this. Sojourner Truth, who was very much a part of the suffrage movement, and I always am humbled by the shoulders that I stand on. And for all the women who are listening and the men who need to hear this, I'm quoting from her Ain't I a Woman speech. Then that little man in the black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman, and man had nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they are asking to do it. The men better let them do it. We don't have to ask men anymore. We are the majority of the voters. We have an opportunity to make this country right again and to make sure that we flip it around and get this country right, our environment, our healthcare, our employment, our economy, so that we can have a place for our next generation. God bless you all. Thank you all. Stay safe. And thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.